Good morning and afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in. My name is Vince Cruz. I am the RNT operating officer, and I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Our next speaker is Teresa Rule. She's the president and founding member of RNT, which stands for Randy and Teresa Professional Services, a cybersecurity and security project management service organization. Teresa also serves as the president of the PM Project Management Institute, Oklahoma City, and is on the National Small Business Association Executive Advisory Board. Teresa holds a project management professional certification, as well as a certified information systems auditor certificate. Teresa specializes in managing security project management for organizations seeking proactive, cybersecure, and compliant environments. Teresa is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, and she is going to talk to you about contingency planning. Welcome, Teresa.
Thank you, Vince, for that kind introduction. I'm excited to be here today to present a little bit about contingency planning and kind of try to tie in some of the topics we've had all week. I'm just trying to get the mechanics of presenting together. And I know we've talked about some of this stuff, but what happens if your organization becomes a victim of cyber attacks? There's my contact information. I'll have it at the end of the slide presentation as well. A little bit about RNT Professional Services. We are a Norman, Oklahoma-based cybersecurity and data privacy firm. We're veteran-owned and staff, woman-owned, service-disabled veteran-owned. We're a DBE in a hub zone, and most of our team members are veterans. Of those, most are veterans of the United States Marine Corps, and I can't explain that. They're just the way it is. I want to talk a little bit about Nist to get started. Now, Nist is part of the United States Department of Commerce. It stands for the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and its mission is to provide a lot of things, but we're going to talk about it from the cybersecurity information security standards. You can access Nist. Oh, let me see. I'll hear a little bit more about Nist. They don't just do IT and cybersecurity. They provide standards for a lot of different organizations across the board, but they are a non-regulatory agency, and they've been doing cybersecurity since the 1970s. CSRC.nist.gov, the Computer Security Resource Center. We are going to talk about the Nist Special Publication Series. So when we talk about, a lot of us in the business will say, oh, the 800-171. Well, that's the asterisk marks here, the pound sign marks. Nist Special Publication 800-171. Nist 800 Special Pub 800- fill in the number. So I just wanted to say, if you hear us talking about a lot of these, that's the lingo. And I realized that I didn't put the 853 on here, but these are some of the references that I used in this presentation. The 834, which is a contingency planning guide for federal information systems. Now, just because the title says federal information systems doesn't mean that they're not good standards to be used for commercial systems as well. I do want to point out that there are industry-specific guides available. For instance, the Federal Financial Institution guidelines will have some very specific guidelines. HITRUST and HIPAA have very specific guidelines for healthcare. So depending on what the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, if you're working in nuclear energy, very specific guidelines. But NIST is like the foundation of all of them. So if you have a solid understanding of a NIST guideline, it will help you segue into another industry. I don't want to say seamlessly, but fairly seamlessly. And these are guidelines that are not just used in the United States, but because they're free and available on the internet for anybody who logs in, they're also used for many, many other, I think I heard last 64 other countries use the US government Nist guidelines as the basis of their cybersecurity standards. So good thing to know if you're trying to get into the cybersecurity world. I would say read these before you go to bed every night, tuck it under your pillow, have sweet dreams of cybersecurity controls and standards, and you too will wake up way more informed. That's a little bit of humor, maybe, okay? I think we've seen this on several presentations about how we identify what we want to protect, the cybersecurity framework from Nist, how we protect it, how we detect if there's any intrusions, we respond to the intrusions, and then we recover. So my presentation is really going to be focusing on the recovery portion of the cybersecurity framework, although I wanted you to kind of understand conceptually where it is in the entire framework. A little bit about contingency plans. There are 8 types of contingency plans. Ooh. Now, business continuity plan, we're not going to talk about all these. We're only going to talk about the one that's highlighted, the critical infrastructure protection plan. I'm sorry, I highlighted the wrong one. The cyber incident response plan. The one right below that is a trick. See if you're paying attention. The continuity of operations plan, a crisis communication plan. A crisis communication plan is an element of the recovery aspect, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in the presentation. Disaster recovery, information system contingency plan, occupant emergency plan, and every organization should have these types of contingency plans. We often see a lot of the occupant emergency plan, like a fire drill or a tornado drill in Oklahoma. You know, people know what to do when you have that type of crisis, but all these types of contingency plans should be developed. You should recognize this slide because we talked about the different types of cyber attacks, and as you know, we don't really worry about the top 3, but it is quite possible that you as an organization can suffer from be a fallout of cyber warfare. We heard from our special agent Byron Militello this morning about how an organization was caught up. Of course, it was those large seed companies are, I call them not small businesses, but big businesses, but how they can be caught up in the cyber warfare that goes on in the cyber espionage for different organizations. Just wanted to refresh you on the different kinds of cyber attacks. The types of cyber criminals, just to get it fresh in your mind who they are, and how you can recover from any type of cyber attack. These were the risks that we talked about earlier in the week, and I wanted highlighted backups because you can see how backups and training and backups, they're very key to having a successful recovery operation. You need to have backups of your systems. I'm going to talk about a little bit about cyber event recovery. There's a lot of elements here, and one of those is to understand your enterprise's resiliency. Now, it's kind of like how determined are you as an organization to recover? What other elements do you have? Do you practice? Do you have tabletop exercises? Do you do monthly recovery operation drills using your backup material to reset your systems? I mean, how resilient are you as an enterprise? And if you, it's kind of like, you know, when you go to the doctor for your annual physical and or your dentist, and they say you need to floss more, and you say to yourself, I will floss more. But do you really? I mean, does your organization actually do these things? Or is it looking back, I should have done X instead of Y? So first you have to have an understanding of your enterprise resiliency. The second thing you need to know is what systems, what data are you trying to recover? What is it that you're trying to protect? Now, we heard from Trish a couple of times about how you need to have an asset inventory. You need to inventory those systems. This is key. Who's the system owner? Who's the system administrator? Who manages the data, the IT? Who makes the business decisions about that particular system? And I'll give you an example. At RNT, we have our own internal PBX. The system owner for that is Rick, who's I think on this session. So if we have a technical issue, we know who to call Rick to deal with any PBX issues. But then we have a business owner for that system as well. So we have to have that documented in writing, and every organization should have an inventory of the systems, whether they're payroll, whether they're accounting systems, client relationship management system, any kind of manufacturing system. Whatever your system is, you need to have it inventoried. Not just the system applications, but also the hardware and software and other infrastructure elements. Okay, for every system you have, you need to have a playbook for the asset. Now, what is a playbook? I'm just picking on Rick and the PBX system. Well, he understands exactly, he has written documentation on how he needs to reboot the system, call in for help, troubleshoot, etc. With a playbook, you're going to be looking at who the system owner is, not just the software, but who is handling the hardware, who's handling the actual application, what business function does it support, and then have detailed processes on how to do the recovery activities. You'll also need to be able to notify appropriate people in the organization. The system is down, we expect to recover in a certain amount of time, which brings us to our recovery objectives. We have those recovery time objectives. How long can this system be down before it affects our business functionality? Is it going to be an overnight fix? Is it going to take us 6 weeks? Is it going to be, just a matter of rebooting? And how will that ripple throughout the organization? If it's a system that supports external clients or vendors, you need to understand how to communicate with them. We also need to document the authority for each system. Who is it that finally gives a thumbs up to go ahead and initiate recovery operations? Even though in a lot of worlds you might want to think that having the IT guy say, well, I need to do this right now, there needs to be a business authority designated to actually say, go forward. And that needs to be documented ahead of time. The last thing you want to do in any kind of emergency is try to scramble and figure out what you need to do next. If you have a written plan, then you follow the written plan. That doesn't mean it can't deviate, but you need to have it written down and documented ahead of time. Next thing we want to do is designate the recovery team membership. Now, you may think it's obvious, but it could be that Rick may be supporting 12 systems in recovery, because quite often we have one IT guy doing the work of 3 to 5. And even though one business owner may say, my system is the most important, in fact, it's really the most important to them, but not to the organization. So you have to have your recovery team membership identified. You also need to document those system details for recovery and any kind of associated procedures. Need to develop a communication plan and a contingency communication option, which means, for instance, if your PBX is down, you can't use your phone systems. If your internet is down, you can't use a VoIP system. You may not be able to use email. If a cell tower is down, if you've lost electricity, how are you going to communicate with the different people that need to be spoken with? So have a contingency communication option. If one person is offline, who else is their secondary or backup person? Now, number 9 is interesting. I've heard Kevin speak about offsite storage options, and I've seen a lot of times where an organization has their backups at an organization like Iron Mountain, or at their local bank vault, or in their local gun safe, if you will. But a lot of organizations now go to cloud backup. Kevin, can I pick on you just a minute to see if you can talk about the advantages and disadvantages of cloud backup?
I guess some of the disadvantages of cloud backup is who is managing that, your services in the cloud. Are you setting that up and configuring it? Do you own that entire server that it is on, or is that server shared with other individuals or other organizations? Because if it's shared with other organizations, you may do everything 100% correct and secure, but someone else on that same server may not be following the same level of security that you are. So if you've got Vince R. Us on there, and he's got a wonderful place to buy t-shirts from, but he put no security whatsoever. If Vince's company gets compromised, and that leads to your company being compromised, you in the end are responsible for the loss of your customers' data because you pick that particular vendor. It's not Vince, it's you.
There you go. That's pretty good. Thank you, Kevin, for just jumping in there and
I had to pick on Vince in return, so.
Yeah. Well,
No, I appreciate that, Kevin. Thank you.
Well, Vince, I could ask you to talk a little bit about communication plans. I know you've done a lot of disaster operations and recovery operations when clear communications is not always the established fact. Do you have any insights to share on communication, especially contingency communication options?
Well, you always have to plan for an alternate means of communications. And for instance, I'll give you a true story. We were in South Korea. The operation was called Team Spirit. That's where the South Koreans and the American Army and Marines and Navy get together and go through some drills. And we had, Kevin will remember this, we had something called a Hadron modem and a radio. And the message that they wanted to put over the Hadron modem over the radio with encryption, of course, was, get this, it's simple words: land the landing force. But they couldn't get the modem to work at all. And it was like 15 minutes. Of course, it was the precedence was flash, which is like within minutes, not hours, days, but minutes. So I told the radio operator, I said, it's simple. Take off the Hadron modem and just read the message. That's all you had to do. Just read the message. So the landing force would land at the proper time. And in that case, you could get stuck on trying to get a method working, but at the same time, if you have an alternate way of getting your message across, then you have to plan for that. And that's just one small example, a sliver of a slice in the life of a communications officer. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a great example. All right, so we talked about communication plan and offsite storage. Let's talk about operational workarounds. And Vince just did a great job of describing an operational workaround, actually. I attended a meeting yesterday evening for the Project Management Institute Alaska annual meeting, and the speaker there was from the PMO for the Alaska Railroad. And he talked about if they're repairing the railroad, it's in Alaska, it's not like you're repairing a highway where you can just have traffic rerouted around, the side of the road. There were a lot of different challenges. And one of the things that he spoke about was a specific bridge that they were repairing, and it was going to cost maybe $190 million, and they set aside $3 million in contingency plans, and they created a risk management plan that listed everything they could think of that could go wrong. And at the end of this bridge reconstruction, they had $2.7 million of contingency funds that remained, and they only had one incident that occurred that wasn't on their risk management plan. And I thought that was a lot of great planning. Of course, I'm a project manager at heart, so we're always looking at plan for the worst event and then hope for the best outcome type of thing. But operational workarounds, you do need to have operational workarounds, because if you are under a cyber attack, you don't know what type it is. You need to be able to plan for, if they attack this way, how do we respond? How do we recover? So if we've lost our internet, how do we get it back? If we've lost our internet and it's not just a single attack, but multiple type of attack, how are we going to recover, and in what sequence? We want to detail the facility recovery information. If your facility is attacked or compromised, how do you need to recover? Can you recover at the same facility, or is there a backup facility? Sometimes you need to stage infrastructure, whether it's hardware, software, any type of physical elements and people to be used in the recovery process. I know there are a lot of organizations, usually pretty large global organizations, that have a staged secondary command center where they can go lights on in less than an hour and be completely operational there. And they have a lot of pre-staged equipment. I don't know if anybody wants to speak to that, but you need to be able to think about all this in your recovery plan. That doesn't mean you need to have an alternate office in a different state. It just means you need to think through it. If this happens here, how do we recover? The next thing we want to talk about is the decision authority. I kind of alluded to that earlier, but just because you're in IT doesn't mean that IT recovery is the one that gets the authorization to turn the lights back on or to start initiating things. And part of that could be for legal and communication reasons. So usually an organization has an incident response team, and that team includes HR, legal, communications, the operations officer, and the CIO and the CISO. So someone from the organizational level responsibility will communicate to the IT recovery team that it's time to initiate the recovery. Clearly, there's a lot of communications that occur during any type of recovery operation, but you need to already identify who the authority is to recover a specific system. Again, it could be the incident response team, the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer, and one of the business system owners, or somebody else. And it could be the somebody else could be, depending on the type of work your organization does, it could be a client organization or an affiliate organization. You also need to have a root cause and containment strategy. Now, being able to identify the root cause of any kind of cyber event is key to planning the best response and recovery action. You need to understand what it is, what is their key objective, what are they trying to get, and how are they, what kind of technical approach is being used. Now, why do you think that would be important? And I'll just ask for anybody from the group to think, why would you want to care how they came in and what they were after? Good response from the crowd, guys. Well, obviously, this will help you strengthen your program's defenses. It'll also help you understand what data that you have is important to other people, and you need to understand the technical aspects of the attack so that you can be able to communicate that within your internal world and see why you are vulnerable. Recovery communications. Now, we've heard, I think our last presentation, Trish mentioned Target and how she was just thinking of the Target breach almost 10 years ago now. But the communication is important on how we communicate any type of event, because it affects how we're perceived by the rest of the world, how our organization is perceived. So you need to be able to coordinate all those communications internally and externally. You need to have a great communications officer involved. In some cases, it may be an external media person talking to the media, but you're going to be looking at a coordination center. You're going to be able to talk to your internet service provider. You also have to be able to talk to the person who's attacking you. They probably will provide a, here's how I want you to get back to me, you know, under the bridge at midnight kind of stuff. You're going to need to be able to communicate to the victims, especially if you have client data. How are you going to notify them of a breach or a loss of the integrity of that data? You'll also want to communicate with the other CSIRTs in the area, the Computer Security Incident Response Teams, CSIRT, and any vendors that may be affected. Again, you don't want to just have anybody doing external communications. That needs to be planned in advance. You need to have pre-formatted letters, if you will, on how to communicate information, because the last thing you want to do is communicate under pressure, off the cuff. There are many, and I don't want to say this in a negative way necessarily, but there are a lot of times the media likes to speak to people that are maybe not as polished or prepared to speak and have their message recorded and televised. I'm trying to think of some good examples, but I can't think of that. You also want to share your recovery insights with other people in your community. Now, the Nist 800-151 has a lot of insights on sharing information, and this is like, who would you normally share information with? Would you share it with your competitors? Would you share it with your business associates? Would you share it with law enforcement? Who do you think we should, and that's a question I have for you. Anybody have an idea on who should be told that we had a cyber attack? Or is it something we should pretty well keep in the dark and not tell anyone?
Well, does breach notification come into play?
It does. It does.
I'd always
Especially
say
if,
ask your lawyer.
yeah, ask your lawyer. You know, I read through the 151, and there's some very specific guidelines on how to share this information and with whom it should be shared. And I didn't try to capture all that in a slide. I just thought, if you're interested in this, go peruse the 800-151. It's pretty interesting. I would say that law enforcement should be notified. It kind of reminds me of, I've kidnapped your child, don't tell anyone or else, you know. And who's in charge of kidnapping cases, no matter where they are in the country? Does anyone know?
Is it FBI?
FBI?
The FBI, thank you. And anyone know why the FBI is in charge? What case flipped it all over from local police to the FBI?
The Lindbergh kidnapping.
The Lindbergh kidnapping. That's right, Rick. Rick knows all kinds of things. Well, the FBI is also responsible for this type of cyber attacks, and if we don't share with them, then, you know, we heard Randy speak earlier today about, I don't remember the exact number, Randy, but in Oklahoma there's 2,500 open jobs, maybe, or was it 25% open jobs? We have to collaborate. We're in the middle of a cyber attack epidemic, and we need to be able to share our insights and recovery. Not necessarily the details of exactly what happened, but sharing those insights is key. And I never see companies that do this, like we're obviously a cybersecurity firm, and if I meet another company that does it, like True Digital in Tulsa, I don't look upon them as competition. I look upon them as collaborators. You know, we're all fighting the fight together. The fight. I don't mean to say cybersecurity is a fighting community, but sometimes we feel kind of beat up. You know. All right. Well, that's what I had to share with everyone. If you need to find me, there's where I am.